Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. If you haven't followed me yet, this is my tech sharing Mondays or Tuesday session, wherever you are in the globe. Given that if you're based in the US, this could be Mondays for you, but I live in Australia. So this is already a Tuesday session for me, or a Tuesday time for me. So I'm a team lead sales engineer for Okta, and my job is to talk about new insights that I have stumbled over time or I have seen, whether it's real life scenarios or development of personal use cases, which could be leading down to new use cases or leading edge use cases. This month's topic is a bit trivial and hot topic, but this is just something I see a lot in my current engagements with customers or prospects who are trying to move from one vendor to another. So hence, the topic is migration strategies from Auth0 to Okta. This topic also got inspired because if you go to Auth0's website, which I'm going to show later, they actually talk about in their documentation site on how you can migrate users from Okta to Auth0. But given that right now Okta doesn't have that, I believe this is the start of a new beginning wherein I'll give a video or a blog, then hopefully I can get something publicized in Okta blogs or such that there's a way for you also to do that step in reverse. But the only difference is that it's Auth0 moving to Okta. So the aim of this presentation, by the way, is not to bash why you should need to move from one vendor to another, but more on looking at migration strategies and techniques that will help you simplify your migration. So let's get this started. So Okta and Auth0. So quick, brief background. So again, both vendors are leading vendors in the IAM space. They provide capabilities that allow developers simplify the authentication authorization requirements. Okta is a enterprise IAM which can serve workforce, partners, customers, identity. Auth0 presents itself as a developer toolkit for identity. So again, the reason why I have Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, they're actually similar, Okta and Auth0, right? Why? Because they want to provide the world more innovative way of doing things, making sure that everything gets simplified. So both personas actually deliver that. Wherein Steve Jobs created Apple, now we have iPads, iPhones, Apple Store. What do we get? We also have the Apple Movies, iTunes. Then Bill Gates created Microsoft, wherein we have Word, we have Azure, we have the devices, Windows 10 devices. So both persons and companies wanted to deliver or provide something that will allow the world become more easier to live in and more effective to live in. So that's why I believe this is the right summary or brief background between Okta and Auth0. Again, my aim is not to bash anyone, so that's why I'm just going to leave that to there. Then the next step is again going back to the hot topic, which is migration. So I found this meme, which is I really like this meme. So data migration, nobody got time for that, right? So migration has always been like a topic, hot topic, wherein if you're moving from one place to another or one system to another, migration is always a pain, or there's a journey where you actually have to understand how would you migrate this data from one source to another source and making sure that data is intact, data is still uh, valid, and also data is usable once you migrate that to the next or the new system. And the challenge there with data migration is that most of the time people get either people get confused with migration. They either get or feel migration is a painful experience, and lastly, things break after migration. Where this is the part where in any organization doesn't want to happen. So that's why this uh, Tech Sharing Monday or Tuesday session aim is to talk about how we can migrate you from Auth0 to Okta in seamless approach, meaningless approach, tested and verified from my end, and also something for you also to evaluate later on as part of your migration planning session, because migration needs a lot of planning, and a successful migration depends on proper planning. And with proper planning, you need proper tools and equipment. And this is my job to explain what are your tool sets and tools or equipments that you can use. So let's now start with the key approaches that can help you migrate your Auth0 users to Okta. So that's my slides. This session is not going to be slides. It's going to be like hand in hand diagrams, documentations. That's why I'm telling you right now, this is purely technical. So for non-technical peeps, maybe you can fast forward to the demo side of things, such that you can see what's the difference. So let's go first with the first thing I want to show. So Auth0 actually has documentation that talks about migration. And you can see scenario one. Again, this is not just mainly for Okta. They have Gigya, they have Okta. I think there's some, see, Stormpath. So the reason I'm doing this tech sharing Monday or Tuesday session is because there's something like this, right? And migrate users from Okta to Auth0. And they actually provide a good documentation on how you can migrate users from Okta to Auth0. It's using the Okta authentication API, which is correct. And this is just really more of migrating the users once authenticated properly. Then on the other side, we Okta, where I currently doesn't have this. So again, I'm starting to create something such that any person who's looking for a way to migrate users from Auth0 to Okta can have something similar to what Auth0 provides. So let's go with the steps. What are the key migration strategies or steps that a user can do? So there's a migration strategy. There's a lot. The first strategy I would say is creating a user in Okta wherein Auth0 will provide the hashing algorithm as part of the payload. So right now, for Auth0 customers, if you want to move out of Auth0 to any other system, I'll use Okta as the target example. You can actually raise a support ticket in Auth0, and they will ask inside the ticket. You'll just have to ask as part of your support cases to give me the hashing or the password hash of all my users that I want to export. So what will happen here? They will give you a dump file, whether it's a JSON file or an Excel file. Can't remember, but this information was I got from one of my key prospects before. But the expectation here is that Auth0 or any IAM provider, if you request for the hashing algorithm or the hash password, they should provide you with that information. Because if you decide to leave Okta, we can actually give you the hash password later on in a secure format. So again, going back to the migration strategies, what you can do is export the hash password from your Auth0 system. Let's just go with one user right now. I have a user called auth export test, which is has a name and an email. Then this is the password hash. So what will happen is once you are able to get that information, you can, which is represented in JSON in my case, I will just have to create a bulk uploader, which will parse the information here and call the Okta Create API. And this Create API will actually allow you to ingest a hash password. So the example here is that you will still create the profile based on the information that's inside the user. Then inside the password properties or the credential properties, there will be a password property, and you can now specify the hashing algorithm. So here, Auth0 uses bcrypt, so you will just have to say that algorithm is bcrypt. The work factor is 10. Then the salt will be something here, I believe. So A08. So this is the salt up to this one. And the value would be anything beyond that. So that's it. The reason why I got bcrypt 10 is because in here, you can see it's 10. So that's how you just create the user in Okta in a bulk process. And from there, all users will now be migrated from Auth0 to Okta. And the password that they already have in Auth0 will remain the same in Okta. So let's go with the actual demo for this use case. So the first demo here is how do you call the create user API. So again, as I said, this is the Okta API that allows you to create a user. You just have to provide a profile, which you got from the extract. And the important one is this one, the credentials. So which I showed earlier. So once you have properly plotted all the information, you can just click send. This should create the user. Yep. So once created, you should get a status of 200 response. Then the user is now created. So the only difference here is that, again, users, well, the only difference here is that the password that has been imported will be used for the first time upon challenge. Then once successfully challenged, Okta will actually use its own hashing algorithm to wrap the clear text password to Okta's own standard hashing, or Okta's own hashing algorithm standard. That's the reason why this is required, such that we can match the hash. Then once the hash is uh, equal, then that's the time we know that it is valid. Hence, in our system, we now know that we should now hash this clear text password with our own standards, such that uh, this won't be the same hash that's been used or imported into Okta. So let's test things out. So given I know the password here, so the password here is 123458, I believe. So what I'll do is I'll copy this one, which is the username. I'll use the Okta widget as an example. So here I have I have this Okta widget already pointed out to my Okta tenant, which is oktauniversity.okta.com. I'll paste the username, then I'll type the password. So 123458. So the expectation here is that given that this password that matches the hash match, then it should allow me to sign into Okta or go to my application. So here I'm going to sign in. So if I'm successfully logged in, as you can see, I'm now redirected to my landing page. And again, this is a Octawid. This is a sample app. I can see it shows the JSON Web Token format that was generated by Okta. So here, if I actually click the auth details, you can see the ID token, again, which contains all the user profile and the access token. So simple, right? So that's one strategy on how you can migrate Auth0 users to Okta, right? Okta provides a create user API, which allows you to ingest a hash password that we support. So by the way, which I showed you earlier, is using bcrypt because Auth0 uses bcrypt. Okta also supports other hashing algorithm like SHA-256, MD5. So we have a proper documentation which I'll share later on, which you can see what are the other hashing algorithms that we support if you want to ingest a hash password during account creation. Cool. So let's log out now. Let's go back to the diagrams. So that's the first strategy. The second strategy, if you don't want to ingest the password, for some reason you feel that ingesting the password, creating the password is a bit tiring, let's go with a webhook approach. When we mean a webhook approach, what we want to do is we just call the Auth0 APIs. Then if Auth0 is able to validate the user or authenticate the user properly, then that's the only time we persist the password within Okta. So here, the only difference here is that you have again, same thing. You need to preload the users within Okta, wherein you need to export all the users that will be migrated to Okta. You will create a process here called the create user API. As you can see, the only difference here is rather than ingesting the hash password, we're actually just saying that leverage a password hook. So which I'll show later in my Okta environment how I set up a password hook. So what will happen is that whenever a password hook is used, Okta will always call that password hook API, which is represented by this one. And from there, it's up to you how you want to authenticate back to your old system, which is Auth0. With Auth0, they provide auth grant type called resource owner password grant credentials flow, password grant credentials flow, which is the auth flow that actually serves its purpose for migration as per standard. So here, what will happen is that the webhook will actually call that auth token in the backend such that it will be able to authenticate the user with the username and password that was filled within the login page. Then once validated by Auth0, what will happen is that it will now create a token, and we will have that webhook to validate the token as well. If the token is valid, then it will return a verified response to Okta. And from there, Okta will now persist the clear text password within the user's directory. So here, this is more of a gradual migration of the password, wherein rather than ingesting a password, you call the Auth0 API. So let's go to the demo. So the first thing I want to show is how do you set a password API, a password hook API. So here you need to log in as an admin in your Okta console. So once you're logged into your admin console, the first thing you want to do is go to workflow, then go to inline hooks. Then you can see there's a password import hook. The password import hook allows you to do what I mentioned earlier, which will call an API to validate the user's credential back to your old system. So here, if I click this one, what you need to define is the name, the URL of your webhook. Then if you want to make it secure, you can provide an authentication field and authentication secret, and even custom header fields to make sure that only consumers that can call this API is properly secured. I already created an existing one, which is this one. So migrate Auth0 to Okta hook. So if I actually open this one, you can see that the hook URL is this one. So I'm using glitch to make it simple. So here's my glitch code, by the way. So in this one, I'm just loading my glitch code. What I did was created several functions. So let's wait for this one to load. Let's refresh this. Yep. So I'll also share the code in my GitHub repo so that you can try it out. So first and foremost, in my packages, I actually uploaded several additional packages, the JSON Web Token package, the JWKS package, such that I can use this later on to validate the token. So in my server.js, what I did was I created, again, this one first. Set the client JWKS key store client. I want to point to my Auth0 tenant, which I'm using. So currently I'm using my own Auth0 tenant. And from there, I can extract all the keys. The keys will allow us later on to validate if the token that was minted was valid, just for additional security purposes. Here, we're just setting the password hook response. If it's successful, we just want to say it's verified. If it's unsuccessful, we want to say it's unverified. This is just additional to get the signing key from what I've said earlier. What's important here is this code, which is this part, migrate Auth0 to Okta hook. So this is the hook that's actually being called by the password hook API. So what will happen here first is we want to get the username and password that was entered inside your application login screen or in the Okta sign-in widget, because I'm going to use again the sign-in widget as the main UI UX. Here, once the username and password has captured inside the HTTP payload, I'm just going to print the username and password. Then from there, I'm calling the auth token endpoint by Auth0. So this is a valid endpoint, which is also available within their documentation. So this Auth0 provides that documentation. So you can actually see the documentation, try it out. So here, what's important here is the endpoint. So this is just your Auth0 domain. Then the endpoint will be auth-token. Grant type, we want to do this because we want to specify what database connection we want to use. So in Auth0, they provide a lot of ways to create multiple directory stores. So if you create multiple directory stores, you will have again, using the Auth0 database, you can have multiple databases, right? So this is my Auth0 tenant. So here you can have multiple DB. In my sample or in this tech sharing Monday, Tuesday session, I'm just using one database. And this is the username password authentication database. So part of the resource owner password grant flow is that if you want to specify a certain connection or realm, what's that they call, you need to provide this grant type, additional grant type. So client ID is the client ID that you set in Auth0 of your application. So let's go back. So under my Auth0 tenant, I have an application and I'm using the traditional app application. So as you can see, if I click here, you can see the client ID, which is this one. and the client secret. Let's go back here. Yep, the client secret, which is here. So this is just a sample application that you set up in Auth0. Then audience, you need to create an audience. So audience in Auth0 is done via here. So you would have an APIs. This is just a way how you can manage scopes and claims on certain audiences. So Auth0 does the audience management in this manner, where you have to create an API. So here you can see I have a migrate to Okta API audience. Then you'll pass the username and the password that you captured. For now, I just want to get an open ID because I already have preloaded the user's profile. That's why I just want to validate if the credentials is correct or not. Then specify the database connection, which is your database name. Here, we call that, this will now execute, call that certain API. Then here, for additional validation use case, I'm actually calling the JWT verify, such that we can validate the ID token that was provided, or access token that was provided by Auth0. If it's valid, then I should say that, yes, I should return a successful response to Okta, such that the password can be persisted to Okta. If it's not, we want to first return a failure response. So if a failure response happens, what will happen? Okta will not persist the password. It will still leverage the hook. And until this webhook returns a successful response, then that's the only time Okta will persist the password. And moving forward, all authentications will be managed by Okta, so forth. That's it. So how do you do that from an end user perspective? So test it out. Again, let's go back to Postman. So I'm just going to call this a new create user endpoint. So as you can see, I'm creating an activate user, creating a profile. And the only difference here, which I said earlier, as compared to this one, here we're passing the hash password as part of the payload. Here, we're just saying it's a password. So if I click send, this should create the user. Yep, Auth0 user. So now to test everything out, I'll open the logging one. It's okay. So I just want to test if the code's running. So we should just go an error. Okay, this is glitch. Okay, cool. So this webhook is now running. So what we want to do is go back to our widget. Give me a second. So I'll copy the username. So the username is Auth0 user. I'll copy the username. I believe the password here is change me 123. Let's see if that works. Can't remember. This is the one. Yep. So as you can see, given that the password hook was triggered, again, we got the username, the password. We were able to get the access token from Auth0. Because if I actually copy the ID token, yep. So as you can see, the ID tokens printed out. This is the information of the ID token. It's valid. That's why it's showing the nickname, the name, again, all the information. Given we got that, we return a successful response. So what's happening now in my Okta widget flow is just purely requesting the user to set up a security MFA, because we have a policy defined right now saying that MFA enrollment needs to happen. So here, maybe I'll just go with the Okta Verify, which is Okta owns own authenticator. So I use Android. I'll click Android. Then this will have a QR code. I'll search for the QR code. I'll just scan the QR code now with my phone. Done. Then once that's done, enrollment should be completed. Yep. Let's wait for this one. Yep. Done. Then this should now allow me to log in. So as you can see, I'm logged in. If I click the auth detail, same thing. We're able to see all the information about the ID token and access token, which is now generated by Okta. Ooh, right? So that's your second approach. When I mean second approach, this is just purely more on using a webhook, a password webhook to migrate an Auth0 user to Okta. So what's the last approach? Last approach is a bit funky, I would say. So the last approach is now, why not? What if I don't want to migrate users preloaded in our pre-stage manner? I want to migrate them just in time. So this like asking users when they log in for the first time, and if the user is not yet in Okta, check the backend system. If the backend system is able to validate the user, get the validate user credentials, get the user information, then push that user down to Okta. So that's a just-in-time migration. So in a just-in-time migration, the only difference here is that we'll be using Okta workflows as one of the key components to trigger this migration in a just-in-time format. For now, I'm going to talk about using sign-in widget, because in just-in-time migration, uh, if you're creating your own web app and your own login screen, then technically to do just-in-time migration is just calling your own business logic services. And then from there, it will do that just-in-time migration in the background. But what if you don't want to build that? You just want to use what's available from Okta. So here, we're going to use the sign-in widget. Right? It's purely driven by Okta, and Okta provides a functionality called process threads. Process threads is a JavaScript functionality. I'm not sure if I can search it here, but I'll just search it here. The widget process thread. So if you go to the GitHub repo of Okta, there's a functionality, JavaScript functionality called process threads. So process threads allows you to call a webhook in real-time manner, pause the Okta login event, call that web API first, do whatever you want. Then from there, it will now do the authentication scenario or authentication flow. And that's the only time it will call the authentication API to validate the user's credentials. So again, going back to our diagram, what will happen is I'll have process threads functionality in the sign-in widget enabled to call an API. Again, I'm using glitch. That API will call the Okta workflows API endpoint, where it will do the same thing we did earlier, which I coded everything, but rather than coding it, we'll go with the low code, no code approach. So let's go first with how we set up that workflows. I think that's what what's actually making everyone like trying to understand, well, how can you do that, right, with Okta. So with Okta, we provide this new capability called Okta Workflows. It's an integration platform as a service. It's give you a low-code, no-code approach. Again, part of my sharing, I'll share this flow, which allows you to not design it anymore. And you'll just actually reuse the same flow which I created. So here I have a flow which I created in Okta Workflows. And the flow starts out with, let's just wait for this to load. So the flow starts out with, come on, taking a while. Okay, let's do this again. I think my internet's just laggy. It's not, we'll just refresh. I think my internet is so laggy right now. Yep, so finally. So how the flow started out is I created a custom API endpoint. So I want to expose this API endpoint as a webhook. So this will be what's important, the invoke URL. This allows you to stitch your API, which I showed in the diagram, and this API will call that to trigger the initiate the workflow process. Once you have done that, same thing, create the resource owner grant type body payload, which I done via coding earlier, but in workflows, I'm just creating it as a text. The only difference here, I'm passing the username and the password payload inside that compose, which you can see here as well. It's almost similar. Actually, this is similar. The only difference is that this is more formatted, which is better. Then here, I'm calling a custom API, which is doing HTTP posts. The only difference is this is calling the auth token flow of Auth0. Then from there, what we'll get is, again, the payload, which is the body, which is the ID token and the access token. So what we're doing is parsing the string response and separate the ID token and the access token using the JSON parse workflow card. Then I'm composing another news payload, which is passing the access token. So because we want to do a just-in-time migration. So what will happen next is we want to call the user info endpoint, wherein it requires an access token as part of the header field. And from there, it will be able to provide all the basic information or basic user profile about the user. And now this is the part where everyone's waiting more for is how do you create that user in Okta to do just in time. So here I'm calling the create user Okta API, passing the username which we captured earlier, the given name, the family name, email nickname which captured in the body, and lastly the password we set earlier such that now we have fully migrated everything, not only the profile, but also the credentials. And lastly, return a 200 response if the status of the create user API is active, and set that user has been migrated equals to true. If the user has it not been migrated for any reason, there's problems, we'll just say it's migrated false. So that's how you design the workflow card in Okta to do that just-in-time migration. Back to our code, which I'm going to reuse. I created a process creds. Remember in my diagram, in reverse, I have this API. So what will happen here? I just created a process creds API endpoint wherein it's just checking if the operation is post, capture the username and the password, call the Okta API, workflows API to trigger that JIT, and lastly, do this checking if migrated equals to true, then return back to your widget to say it's true, migration has been successful, or else migration equals false. Then, so how do we set that process creds function in the widget? So here, let's go back to the widget. So I have a sample now, which I already have created. So you can see here to set that process creds functionality in the widget, you'll just have to add additional payload within the widget config called process creds, create the function when, again, it will call that API, which I created in Glitch, which will trigger the Okta workflow to do that just-in-time migration. Then if it's migrated, it was a true alert user found. Again, then callback, which will now go back to the standard step of authenticating the user to Okta such that we can now let the user log in. The expectation this should work because you have successfully migrated the user from Auth0 to Okta. If the migration is not successful, we want to alert user not found, then do whatever we want. So I'm now going to copy this one, this config, go back to my widget. I'm gonna paste this one. This should refresh. So what we're gonna do is test this out with an Auth0 user, which is John Doe. So I have a user right now, which is John Doe. John Doe. Yep. Yep. You can see here John Doe. Yep. John Doe. Yep. So we'll migrate John Doe to Okta. So inside Okta, there's no John Doe yet. So if I actually go to my user search user directory, John Doe. Yep, as you can see, there's no user in Okta called John Doe. So let's start the just-in-time migration. So going back here, I'm gonna put in John Doe as the username. I believe the password is change me123 as well. Let me just double check because it's been a while since I did this. I will check. Yep, sorry. Let's go back here. So, yep. So if we go back to flow to check that one, let me just check what's my password I set before. So the password I set is change me1236. So it's change me123. So I'm just gonna copy it. Change me123 exclamation point. So in this part, again, given I've already set the process creds functionality in the widget, this will now do the just-in-time migration. So if I click sign in, this should trigger the just-in-time migration. Yep, as you can see here. And if we go to flow history, in Okta workflows. As you can see, a successful workflow has been triggered, which is around 11:52 my time. And if we go back here on the Firefox, we should be able to get an alert, say user found, click OK. Let Okta do the validation of or authentication. Now we have logged in as John Doe. And here we inspect the same auth details, ID token, access token. This contains John Doe's information, which is now provided by Okta's authentication or auth capability. So here we have now fully successfully migrated user John Doe in a just-in-time format. So if we go back to the dashboard, sorry for this one, search for John Doe. You can see John Doe has been created in Okta. Username, first name, last name, primary email, nickname Johnny. And if we inspect further the workflows flow, which is this one, given I have saved all the data, you can see here, change me123, called the auth flow from auth0 doing the resource owner password credential grant flow. I got the access token. As you can see, use the access token. It's part of the bearer authorization flow. Called the get user info endpoint, passing that access token. I was able to get the user information. So if we actually inspect this forward here, you can see this is the payload that Auth0 provided, OpenID and profile payload. Chop all the key information, call the create user API, and return data migrated through. And from there, we have fully shown the third step of doing just-in-time migration from Auth0 to Okta using Okta workflows and the sign-in widget process creds functionality. So I would say, again, in summary, I have shown 3 approaches, which allows you to migrate users from Auth0 to Okta, wherein this is purely allowing you to simplify your migration strategy. So let's go to the diagram. I provided you 3 strategies. First strategy is just purely import hash passwords from Auth0 to Okta. Second approach is using password hook, wherein you do the password or credential validation in real time. And if it's successful, that's the only time you persist the password within Okta. Both scenarios right now requires preloading. Then the last approach, migration strategy, is migrating users in a just-in-time format, and you don't even need to preload them. So again, my name is Jefferson Howe, Team Lead Sales Engineer for Okta. I hope that you find this tech sharing Monday or Tuesday session very educational and insightful on how you can migrate your users from Auth0 to Okta. To the next tech sharing Tuesday session. Thank you and stay safe, everyone. And till the next show.